Hello and welcome to the Gothic Unicorn. This time I'm going to show you how I make these two cushions. A simple cushion that you can make in under an hour, and then a more complicated cushion that with design time has taken me somewhere in the region of about 16 hours. So let's see how I do it, shall we? Now for my easy cushion, I'm going with a stitched technique. You can do cushions by gluing, and there are people that have got tutorials for that out there. I just don't have a lot of good experience with gluing fabric and it staying glued, so I like to go for the stitched one. Plus, when you're working with this sort of fabric, it's so easy, it really is. And I'm using felt. I've got a plain felt and I've got a contrast one. This one is actually a printed one that I bought several years ago as an Halloween thing, and it's got a bit of a cobweb design on it. So that's what I'm going with. To stuff it, I'm going to use cotton wool. Well, we call it cotton wool in the UK. The Americans, you just call it a cotton ball. That's all it is. I'm going to take one of those apart. And I've got some contrasting embroidery thread. You can go for a colour that isn't so obvious, but I want to go with a contrasting colour at the moment so that you can actually see what I've done. And I'm also going to be using a relatively sharp needle, not an embroidery needle. Although I'm using embroidery thread, you need a point to be able to get through the felt when you're stitching. So that's what I'm going to actually use. To begin, I have cut 2-inch square pieces of the felts, one for the back and one for my front. You can do these in whatever size you want, depending upon what scale, but for 1/12, an inch is equivalent to a nice big 12-inch cushion. And I have separated out 2 strands of my embroidery thread and put a little knot in the end. You don't need to knot it, but it is easier knotting it than trying to lose the ends in a neater way. Now I'm stitching this up with blanket stitch, and what I've done is I've started from just round one corner, and I'm just going to work all the way around. Now this is a bit harder to get through because the cobweb is done in a sequiny, glitter, that's the word I was looking for, in a glitter glue, I think. And all you do is you just you go from one side to the other, and before you finish your stitch you pull your needle back through. You always go from the same side through to the same side. So I'm going from my front side through to my back, and then catching the thread and pulling it up. And then what that does is it gives you a bit of a edge along the piece, which I think actually looks quite effective. Now I'm doing these a bit on the small side. That last one was a little bit bigger than I'd have liked. Because obviously it's a small piece, but that's what I'm doing. There are better tutorials for doing blanket stitch, but this is what I'm doing. I'm using blanket stitch, which is the stitch that you'll quite often find used for Christmas decorations and that sort of thing, because it is quite simple, and it does look quite effective. Now, once you've got all the way around and you've got your opening, which in my case is going to be at the bottom of my pillow, it's time to stuff it. Now this is not going to need a lot of stuffing, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cotton ball and I'm just going to pull a bit off and unravel it. Now I've got a cocktail stick here because this piece is too small. If you're working at a bigger scale, which you can, you know, 1/6 scale dolls need furnishings as well. All you need to do is obviously scale things up. You could possibly get a bit closer to actually being able to fill it a bit easier, but I've got my little cocktail stick, a clean one, not one I've used for gluing, and all I'm doing is I'm taking small amounts of the cotton wool and I'm just going to push it in and make sure it goes up into the corners and all down the sides. And it is really as simple as that. You can make it as full or as skinny as you want, depending upon where you want to put it. Now I think I've got enough in there. It's not very fat, but yeah, a little bit more. It's trial and error. It really is trial and error, and I do push it up a bit further than it might need to go because of stitching it together. And then once you've done it, all you do is you continue stitching along the bottom to stitch the cushion up. Once the cushion is all stitched up, what you can then do is you can manoeuvre it a little bit. Some people like using rice for weight or things like that. I'm not keen on putting anything like that in the doll's house where it might attract pests. If it's in a jar or something like that that's going to be sealed, that's different, but I'm not altogether keen. But anyway, there we have it, my really simple little cushion. You could make a similar cushion using an ordinary fabric rather than felt, but what you would need to do with that is to in effect hem it at the same time. So what I would do is fold over the edges and iron it so that it's fixed, obviously the piece of the size that you want, and then do the same thing on your corner, around your corners, so that you'd have all four sides done, and then you can stitch it up, stitch two pieces together in the same way that I've done with this one. As I say, I just use felt because it's easy, and felt can be used in the doll's house for a number of purposes. You can use some of the softer felt to represent a more fleecy, blankety fabric. Or if you've got some nice thick felt, you can actually use it to make a rug, a small piece of carpet to fit in a particular space. Now I have got some beautiful felt for doing this, but unfortunately because of current restrictions my local fabric shop isn't open and I haven't been able to get any in colours suitable for this project. But I think this quite works. It looks a bit fun and I quite like it. To make my cross stitch cushion I am going to be using this fabric, which is just some that I've got lying about, which is 28 olds to the inch. So a cushion that was 12 inches in real life would be obviously an inch in this size, and therefore I would need a design that was 28 by 28. Obviously I can't start off on the fabric, I've got to start off by planning out what I'm going to do on some paper. Graph paper is great for planning out cross stitch, whether miniature or full size, because each little square can become one cross in your design. So what I've had to do is I've had to figure out how big I want my actual cushion to be. Now this is much bigger than the actual cushion will be. This is actually equivalent to about 1.25 inches square on the fabric, but I have planned it out with my required amount of boxes, and then I'm going to start plotting out my design onto here. Now I'm actually going to adapt a design that I used in my witch's cottage. I'm going to use the same central motif, and then I'm going to add a different border to it, and that's my next step. And what I will do is I will start off by using a pencil. I use a mechanical pencil for this because it's got quite a fine point to it, and it means I don't have to keep sharpening the pencil. And then I will add colour to it, which will differentiate between the different parts. Now the colours that I use on my plan will not necessarily translate to the colours on the actual sewn piece. I may do, but I might use colours with more contrast on here so that I can actually see the difference when I come to sew it. This is my planned out design now, which I'm now going to add colour to, which will actually hopefully make it make a bit more sense, because at the moment, as I know, it's just a load of lines and quite confusing. I have now added the colour. As you can see, it's a little bit garish. It's not going to be this garish when I actually stitch it, but in order that I can tell the difference between the colours, I've gone for some quite vivid contrasts. Next, I'm going to pick out my actual threads, and then I'm going to start sewing. I think I've decided on these as my colours, mostly earthy tones to go with the room, with a bit more of a pop with the red, which I'm going to use for the central heart design. At this point, I've actually been sewing for about 5 hours, and as you can see, my central design is being surrounded by its frame, and then obviously I've got the border to add. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to take, but as you can see, this is not a quick craft. It has taken me over 14 hours of stitching, but my cross stitch panel for my cushion is finally completed. Now I'm going to prepare this ready to turn it into a cushion. I have folded over the edges to make my front panel, and I have also used a little bit of glue in a few places to make sure that the fabric doesn't start unravelling while I'm sewing. It's not exactly the most exact way of doing this, but it kind of works for me. And I've got a piece of the felt that I used for the back of the simple cushion to use as my backing piece, and this should be the same size. It's a little bit big, but I can trim it back down. And I'm going to start sewing this on, again using blanket stitch to get a nice decorative piece around the edge. A little cross stitch panel turned into a cushion. Now I know I said before I started stitching it that I was going to use the blanket stitch again. Well, I didn't. I went to, but I decided that actually I was going to get a better effect if I just, I don't even know what it's called. It's where you stitch over an edge. It might be called an overstitch, I don't know. I'm not that good at sewing. But I've just gone all down the edges, and it means that most of the white of the canvas is actually now covered up, and I like how it's turned out. Now you could add a little miniature tassel to a corner on a cushion like this, but I think that this actually looks quite good as it is, and so I'm going to be leaving it here. Here we have them, my two cushions, my simple little felt blanket stitch cushion and my far more complicated over 14 hours of sewing and the best part of 3,000 stitches cross stitch cushion. That's 3,000 stitches for the front, that doesn't include stitching it up, but I'm really pleased with how they've turned out, and I'm looking forward to putting them into my project. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe. I upload every week, and until next time, bye.